Looks like there's a couple more coming on.
It does, yep. Maybe we should give everyone just another second.
Yeah, guys, we'll go ahead and get started in about 90 seconds, if that's okay with everyone. Well, to our entire audience, welcome to episode 2 of the Catalyst Open Mic Series. We hope we all find balance in this new normal for now. And as always, I want to thank my panelists for their contributions today and really embracing this change in both cadence and how we're working with our clients each day and inside our communities. I know Sam's going to go ahead and hit the record button. And I think from there, we will go ahead and get kicked off. We have a lot of content to cover today, and I'd be really remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to recognize Samantha D'Amico. Sam is the one who really puts all this magic together, and both is our internal producer, marketing manager, and really one that just shines in this time of agility with our clients. And then Sam, I also wanted to just give you a shout out as well. I know this week Catalyst was named to the CRN Tech Elite 250 for 2020. So congratulations on not only that award, but everything you did in light of that to get things moving towards that award. I know we've won that in the past, but certainly wanted to at least call you out and appreciate you and thank you for all you do. All right, so for rules of engagement, as far as how the audience can engage during this conversation, we're using a WebEx meeting center technology today, and you guys can raise your hand, you can post chats, we may put some polls out there depending on how the conversation goes, but really encourage you guys to ask questions, provide feedback, and at the end you'll get a brief survey about the content and its relevance to you in your organization. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce the panel today. Again, my name is Jesse White. I've been at Catalyst for just over a decade and have the privilege of having a conversation today with whom I think are 3 of the industry's brightest in their respective areas. Mike Talbert, many of you know and appreciate his contributions to your firm, as well as Kyle MacNaughton and Steve Rattacasa, all longtime Catalyst employees and really respected experts in their fields. And so we'll be talking to these gentlemen today just around some of the trends that they've seen and really some unique ways to help our clients in this time of uncertainty as well. So I did want to just chime in and share. I had several questions from our last open mic session. And so the first question that I wanted to just recap with you guys and make sure the audience was aware, I do make it a point to try to answer these, is I got one from the audience that said, I didn't know Steve roasted coffee. Is it any good? And so this is Steve's iconography on one of his coffee bags. And Steve, I just wanted to tell you, I've been enjoying it all week and it's delicious. And I will text you my address after this is over because I'll expect another 12 ounces in the mail if that's okay with you.
Firing up the roaster tomorrow morning, so not a problem.
Great. We'll be excited. I can even work on getting you a prepaid label. But thank you again, and just wanted to again make sure the audience was aware. If you guys have a chance to sneak over and check it out, please do so. Kyle, one of my longtime friends and colleagues, somebody asked me if Kyle had a bird, and they said I was unaware that Kyle had a bird. Does that bird have a name, and if so, what is it? I do not think, Kyle, you don't have a bird actually, do you?
Not one that I feed anyway, except at least not intentionally.
Oh, okay, good to know. If you do get a bird, we'd love to put a poll out there to help you name it. And if nothing else, we will. I think we've got some creative folks inside the panel that can help you coin that bird with a name. And then Mike Talbert had suggested not only some personal stock picks last week and some portfolio tweaks that he had made, but I got a question if Mike Talbert was still long on his Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. So I did some research this week, and that was, how did Mike Talbert do against the Dow from a watermark? And Mike, you absolutely crushed it. And so when you look across the three that you were mentioning that were vital parts to your future retirement program, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, all of them did better than the Dow. And you used to work at Microsoft, didn't you, Mike, on the ADFS team a long time ago? Is that why you're such a bigot for those guys?
Yeah, you could say that. It also
Okay.
too, they're the biggest players in the cloud market at this point, and there's still a lot of room to grow.
There you go. Well, good job. I may dump my personal advisor. I had another down week, as many of us did, and I think it's definitely kind of rip roaring back. Hopefully, I know that the Congress or the House just passed a $2 trillion stimulus or COVID response. So that will certainly do some good for everybody's portfolio, I'm sure. And if not, you can always leverage Mike outside the realm of technology as well. And so we'll move into a couple of the things that I thought were interesting this week. And that was, what some of the big guys are doing. And when I say big guys, is we're going to focus fundamentally on optimization, automation, and really how organizations are utilizing some of these things to get better during this time. But we have seen some just fascinating things happen in the last week, and I just wanted to kind of open with that in general. The first thing that I thought was interesting was I read a story about Microsoft delaying non-critical patches for the next few months. They will still be producing, security vulnerability patches and fixes, but they've kind of stopped everything. And so you think about that third Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday sort of cycle that they have across the board for different things. That's something that I thought was fascinating. Another thing, just a trend or observation, is all of the social giants, right? So Google, Facebook, Twitter, Spotify, all these guys that make mad amounts of dollars from an ad revenue perspective have all already forecasted their 2020 ad revenue down, in some cases 20 to 40%. Spotify, I think, was the highest there. But I just thought that was a fascinating trend, that they're actually redevoting and repurposing ads into things that can actually help the population. I thought that was pretty admirable of them, and certainly cool of them to do just overall. And then we've also seen some of our own clients going to things like staggering break times, right? Staggering hours of work to keep manufacturing facilities in general, or retail, if there are things out there where we're supporting clients to keep the social distancing mandate sort of up. We feel like that's caused some adjustments on the technology side as well. When we look at the three topics we're going to cover today, optimization, automation, and then what we've talked about before and even last week as eventual repatriation of our workloads and of our workers, we wanted to kind of consider these three things and really dig into them, here for the next 30 minutes or so, on what organizations should be doing in this time to make sure that they're hitting the mark. So one of the things that I thought was fascinating, I picked up a story as well, and actually called one of my healthcare colleagues on this. I'm sure you guys have all seen, Steve, Mike and Kyle, essentially many foreign countries. You take Taiwan and Singapore in general, right? They've set up this kind of geo-fencing idea with forcing their citizens to check in on their mobile devices from time to time, and then giving them information whether or not folks are inside or outside of areas that they should be if they are on quarantine. Obviously, that's defeatable with things like leaving your phone at home and that sort of thing. But there are some interesting dynamics coming out there. And as we start to trend into the light of overarching ethics, right, and influencing people in ways that technology traditionally wasn't invented to do, I got to thinking about the healthcare masses. And so when we look at this imagery on the news or on social media or whatever it is, we see all kinds of challenges in healthcare. And so I called a good friend of mine who runs a mobility practice for a Fortune 15 company. And he was saying that many of the hospitals are starting to use things like RFID and starting to track these patients even more delicately than they have in the past. We've seen that trend here in the Carolinas specifically really take off in the last decade or so, but it got me thinking around, wow, what an actual use case, right, outside of the bariatric bed or, beds that are in places that are high rental items, right, that organizations, may be challenged with. Now we're actually tracking the COVID breadcrumbs, right, as patients move throughout these facilities. And I just thought that was a fascinating thing. And then apparently they're pushing that down to materials management. They're pushing that down to environmental services and having extra cleaning precautions kind of follow that. I just thought that was a neat kind of technology use case of how we're influencing, safety in numbers in healthcare in particular. So Mike, I really wanted to start with you. Last week we kind of went in a linear fashion and covered topic by topic. This time we're going to have much more of just an open conversation, and as always, encourage you guys to interrupt one another and make it radical candor as always. But Mike, I got to thinking about what, if you just take healthcare in particular, or the opposite in education, right, where everybody's now gone home and all the schools are closed, right? What are some of the things that we've seen our clients doing in this space specifically to make sure their environments are optimized? Because we know they deployed a lot of things, they put a lot of stuff out there, and maybe even some Band-Aids here or there that they're going to have to unwind, and we'll talk about that in the repatriation section. But what are some things that our clients are doing or you've been asked to help with as far as giving them better visibility and really optimizing their experience overall on the infrastructure side?
Yeah, so I think on that, it's really kind of twofold. One is, with a focus on the remote workers, for a lot of our customers, last week was, hey, let's enable our remote workers, or our workers to be able to work from home, ordering a bunch of laptops, things like that, headsets, sending those home with the workers, getting them connected, kind of getting through that initial rush and the initial turn up of, so many additional, work from home users. What we're now seeing and what we've been asked, some questions around is, so now that all that's out there, how do we manage those devices, especially from a security standpoint? Being that they are, quote unquote, off net at this point, it's really difficult to ensure that they stay, up to date with patches and things like that. And so a lot of the conversations have really shift, towards more device management type platforms such as, Intune or, workspaces or things like that. So that's some of the questions. The other is internally, we've seen a little bit more adoption of cloud just to kind of spin up additional workloads and things like that to manage, the impact of more users accessing those resources remotely. Same with VDI in the cloud and everything else. So, and we can talk a little bit more about that in the repatriation section. But, from a cloud perspective, it can be very easy to, spin up and spin down resources. And we see that with, healthcare in a lot of instances because they've started using a lot of, telehealth, so to speak, right? So being able to, from an app on your phone, connect to a physician's assistant or a physician themselves, so you don't have to go into an office and you don't, protecting yourselves that way. Technologies like that have been around for a while, and those are really gaining steam over the last few weeks, especially. So being able to scale up like that, for those to be able to support the type of demand that technology is demanding at this point.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's interesting. I know we've had several customers that have reached out to us kind of in a panic. This is where some of those things like the boost licensing and different technologies come into play. And again, we're not going to talk about vendors. We were very agnostic in these conversations. But the point is we have seen many customers reach out around, increasing connectivity to the outside world, right? We had a large facility reached out to us wanting some hardware, and we were able to essentially just provide a different workaround that was literally cost neutral by just unlocking some of the unused horsepower inside their existing infrastructure, and then working with their carrier to to bump that bandwidth up kind of on demand. I know the carriers are going crazy right now. We've seen some outages and service impacting. So just goes back to that kind of if you do things right up front, right, it makes it easier down the road. If you do them easy up front, it makes it harder down the road. And I think those clients and customers that have done a good job putting those things together are certainly reaping the benefits of that now. Steve, interested from your perspective, and again, when I introduce this topic to you, I think about something a little bit different, right? And what I mean by that is how are organizations, to Mike's point around cloud, optimizing their internal workloads, right? How are companies today that are either seeing a bigger demand or a different type of demand using the technology in place to really drive optimization inside that user experience?
But to Mike's point, last week was kind of the not necessarily panic, but very much reactive, where it was we need to get connectivity between two things essentially. We need to connect our users to each other so they can continue to collaborate, and we need to connect the users to the applications and the data that they require. And so last week was a little bit of a let's just get that in place. And maybe it wasn't done in the most elegant of fashions, but it kind of got there to start with. Now it's in this optimization phase of, okay, are we able to increase the resources allocated either in our data center, and if not, are there alternatives in the cloud that we can provide and allocate certain resources or increase resources to these workloads, whether that's a virtual desktop that maybe had like 1 vCPU and 2 gig of RAM, and on those resources are being doubled, or maybe it's scaling out in a more modern and cloud-friendly type of way where certain tiers of applications are being hit harder than others. There's also, I think, a lot of other things from a user experience that makes working remotely a little bit easier and a little bit more effective. So I don't know anybody would say that I'm 100% what I was doing at the office, 3 Tuesdays ago. I'm at that same operating efficiency now. And that optimization, if maybe they're at 60 or 70%, there's a handful of things that can be done that are even outside of the infrastructure. Things like getting a high quality headset or microphone, I think makes a world of difference. And for a lot of folks that are home with, kids and spouses, and there's a lot of noise and chaos and dogs and lawnmowers and all the things that they weren't accustomed to hearing on calls and webinars like this, a mic that can isolate sound, or a noise canceling headset so you can hear those, that you're communicating with. Webcams so that you can see each other when bandwidth and the allocation of bandwidth is available. Now, those are all things that I think help with the user experience that aren't necessarily tied to the infrastructure, but that really do make a significant difference in bridging the gap of kind of efficiency in their role.
Sure. Good. Was that comment around kids and lawnmowers directed directly at Mike and I, or was that just a general sentiment?
Just a general sentiment. I saw somebody that there's, a whole bunch of memes that have kind of come from the working from home right now. And, several of them are like, bingo games where, heard a lawnmower, you check the box, right? Someone's dog is barking on the pole, you check the box. And, there's very simple things that you can do to help with those, right? Like, and I hate to go the gaming route on you. I know you're a big fan of gaming and esports today, but some of the gaming headsets are designed for what workers are dealing with now, right? They want to have something they can wear comfortably for an entire day, which gamers, they're gaming for hours at a time. They want high quality audio. They want the ability to kind of isolate sound from the outside so they can focus on the task at hand. And these are not expensive, but those are things that can be acquired that make this current situation a little bit more palatable and a little bit more, I hate to say normalized, but a little bit less. It was an emergency. This was our reaction to a little bit of, okay, I'm kind of getting used to this is the new working environment for the next, hopefully only a few weeks, but it seems like it could be a fair bit longer than that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and Kyle, to your perspective, obviously on the collaboration side, we've heard it both ways. We've seen all these sharing with Zoom and with WebEx and with Microsoft Teams of these, virtual meetings, happy hours, that sort of stuff. And then we've also seen customers that are like, hey, we're at capacity and we're asking users to not flood the internet circuits and lines, right? Obviously, if everybody's at home, it's not such a demand, but we have seen some of these major providers have issues. Any news or stories or updates on that you feel like is relevant, or do you feel like they too have kind of braced through the craziness and are now at a place where stability has been achieved?
I think we're not quite at a place where we have completely stable environment. It does seem like there's a few little hits. In fact, I even heard somebody recommend scheduling meetings 10 minutes, 15 minutes past the hour instead of right on the hour, because I'm scheduling right at the top of the hour and it stresses the bandwidth of everybody. So there are little things we can do to kind of move that around. I did hear today a worker of mine that got a notification that his bandwidth was cut down by his provider at home because of the bandwidth requirements. So apparently you're hearing some of that now. I'm getting a notification in my audio and says it's not great, which maybe we're having some issues here in Spartanburg as well. So I think hopefully you can hear me okay enough to hear that. I think we're still kind of reaching a level of figuring out where everybody's going to land, and there are definitely times when it hit harder than others. So it seems like everybody's been patient with it, but it's been a bit of a challenge for sure, and I'm sure those providers are bullets from some of the calls that they've gotten. So.
And I've seen that some of the bigger bandwidth consumers of the internet, such as YouTube and Netflix, they've fallen back to lower quality levels by default for videos. So what may have loaded as a 4K or 1080p video, at 60 FPS, going to YouTube now, for me at least, all my videos are automatically loading at 480p. And for certain content, that's fine, but that's just like one of those. It's looking at it now, you're like, oh, it makes total sense with everybody competing for bandwidth and seeking entertainment or education, via, Udemy course or YouTube videos or Netflix, content, dropping quality significantly reduces the bandwidth required. And in a lot of cases, in the example of like a 4K video, a lot of people don't have that capability as it is. So they wouldn't know if they were seeing 4K or 1080p, but the significance that provides in freeing up bandwidth that can be used in other places is quite significant.
Yeah, and we've even seen from the ISPs themselves, they're out there, most of them have some sort of data limit per month on an account, and they're lifting those restrictions at this point to be able to support, the users that are working from home. So I imagine their networks are being stressed as well.
Yeah, for sure. We have seen, again, reports of up to 70 and 80%, increases in utilization, which if you look at that demand, networks are built with the fundamental, concept of oversubscription, right? And that everybody won't use them at once in your neighborhood or cul-de-sac. And that's been a big challenge for those guys as well. All right, interesting. One of the focuses we have at Catalyst is kind of automate everything, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about, some of the automation techniques we've seen our customers deploy in this time to quickly ramp services or different things. So everybody's probably aware we had a big workshop scheduled. I think it was actually going to be wrapping up this week for our automation course that we were offering. It was a 4-day kind of automation fundamentals framework that we were offering here in the Carolinas. And we know we obviously had to cancel that, but essentially, Mike, I wanted to ask you, from a network, we still have a lot of clients and customers that are confused about what this can do for them. So can you maybe share a couple of examples of where you've seen just even simple automation be used here in the last few weeks as organizations have dealt with this sort of demand?
Yeah, a couple of simple areas that can help is really around, kind of the edge and WAN perspective. So one of the things is being able to, quickly stand up additional, virtual firewalls and things like that. And there's several automation tools that can be, taken advantage of. In a lot of cases, it may be part of it is a part of, if you're a VMware shop, some of the native tools available there to spin up, and clone and things like that, virtual resources and to be able to scale out fairly quickly. And the other too is the concept of really being able to connect to these devices and quickly configure those based on a known config set. So leveraging things like Ansible, for example, to be able to quickly add in additional firewalls to be able to go out and support more users. And being able to spin up this configuration that matches right all the other firewalls in the environment, so that we ensure that the configurations are the same between all of the devices out there, so that the user has the same experience.
Sure. I know too, even, to Kyle's side of the house, on the collaboration side, we've seen some organizations pushing, back to Steve's comments earlier around compression, right? And taking advantage of maybe some of those lower quality but higher compression audio streams to support those workers. In fact, during this conversation, I just got a text from Verizon that said, we have upped your mobile hotspot 15 gig for the next 3 weeks. Use it, as much as you want, sort of thing. That was generous of them. But we do know that a lot of customers don't have that ability to do true automation like that and unlock those sorts of things. So fascinating. Steve, and yeah, anything on your side that you want to share?
Yeah, I have a few some might not as kind of put into the category of automation, but it is a process that kind of handles things automatically, and that's just reducing the timeouts on things like either remote desktop services sessions, or if you're running a VDI environment, that you can set an idle or disconnected session to bring that virtual machine offline in a shorter period of time. So in the past, we used to say you never really wanted to set this to be 60 minutes, because if your user takes an hour and 10-minute lunch, do you really want to log them out of their session? Well, now, if they're not going to a restaurant, leaving the office to come back for lunch, maybe you can say an hour, or maybe you drop that to 30 hours if someone's remotely connecting to a virtual desktop, or a remote desktop services environment, and they're idle for 30 minutes, put it in a disconnected state, hold it there for 15 minutes, and then if not, bring it offline, and those are resources that can be consumed by somebody else. There's also automation and scaling those systems out, where you can set policy or scripts to evaluate either the total number of sessions in the environment, or the average CPU percentage being used by these things, and you can then automatically scale and make available additional desktops or connection opportunity for people working from home that are connecting into those systems. And I think those are kind of the lower hanging fruit elements of some of the automation that we've seen. Because again, some people, something like as simple as the session timeout, we've probably all configured those throughout our careers hundreds of times, but never really considered automation. But if a user disconnects, we don't want to hold that entire machine up if we can allow it to be used for a different purpose by a different user. And then I think taking that to a little bit of an extreme automation for the most innovative of organizations that have gone a little bit further in their journey of cloud as a operational model and not really a destination, is if they have applications that are containerized and they have the ability to scale up certain microservices that make up that application, that they can then scale those with a lot of the things that we're seeing and hearing customers using Kubernetes for, where they can say, hey, this kind of middleware tier of our application that's designed to do load balancing needs more horsepower, and so we're going to scale it from the 8 nodes that it's on now to this 16 nodes to handle this increased load right now.
Gotcha. So you're saying essentially, just to sum that and kind of replay what I heard, Steve, again, not at the level of you are from a technical perspective, or Mike or Kyle, really just being more stingy through automation and scaling out, maybe sessions a little bit faster to provide a better experience for somebody that is actively using. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right?
Yeah, so I think that's the easiest, right? That's the lowest hanging fruit. It's very easy either via group policy or policy within the application, or the connection brokers a lot of times have that type of option available. If you're using a cloud-based virtual desktop solution, it'll certainly have the ability to disconnect those like you described. The other side of that is depending on the platform, you can then scale it up or down based on usage. So you can set it if we're seeing an average CPU utilization of 60%, that's a little higher than we would be comfortable with, and we don't think the users are going to be getting a great experience if the CPU on this system is being used that vigorously, that we're going to add 2 or 3 more nodes to this environment. And those I think are a little bit on the easier and a little bit more palatable options, as opposed to like I said, the extreme end for an organization that looks at everything and they use everything as a cloud operational model, meaning everything's containerized and we can raise and reduce the amount of containers used based on the different tiers of our in-house microservice app. That's a much more extreme use case. Those are going to be the more enterprise customers that tend to be able to leverage technology in a little bit more of a forward thinking and innovative way.
Great. Good feedback, gentlemen. Thank you for that. All right, let's shift gears. I want to make sure we have plenty of opportunity for questions today and really more of an open dialogue with the audience. So we're getting a couple coming in through the window here in chat. I want to talk about some of the best practices that some of our clients either are or are not, exercising right now around this eventual repatriation of their applications, of their users, of their assets that have been, overnight almost sent home. And so I think, Steve, you had mentioned earlier, right, that a lot of organizations are kind of through the frenzy. Things are balancing out a little bit. They're getting, some sanity back into their day-to-day. They're figuring out that, okay, maybe we didn't do this perfectly. They've made some optimization. They've automated what they can. What should organizations really be thinking about as they look, again, as we're all hopeful of, it's not a prolonged thing any more than it has been. But let's say that things start coming down. The U.S. has now surpassed every other country in the amount of positive cases. There's been some bets for, things like testing availability and driving that and just whatever. But when you look at this, we've seen organizations create, even through automation, right, change logs to make sure that they're not losing some of this, very quick ad hoc changes that they've made to their environment so that they can unwind those when the time's right. But let's talk a little bit about what the best organizations are doing to keep up with these things. Some of our clients have very formal, rigorous change control process. Some of them do not. And so let's say that I'm a customer that is just kind of getting started with a ticketing system, or even if I have a Remedy or a Snow up and running, what are some of the things that you would want your IT team doing on the backside to make sure that we do not have problems when we start pulling users back in, right? We've talked about orphan machines before and stuff getting left on in the cloud and shadow IT and all those sorts of things. So how are organizations going to deal with that challenge here in the near future?
I would say the very first thing I would suggest someone in that scenario to do is to sit down with the other members of their team and immediately brain dump into some shared format any of the known and remembered changes that have been made. And I say it that way because whenever we see these situations happen, um, this wouldn't have been as extreme as a disaster recovery exercise, but they're very similar in that you tend to do what it takes to get things online, and you're not really sitting there and documenting everything along the journey. So if you're not in that place where a lot of your systems are going to have either an automated change log that's tracking it, or something like Git that's giving you that native kind of version control, that would be the first thing. Is I would say immediately put pen to paper and write down all the things that you either had to skip or patch or that you changed to make the current environment feasible. From there, I would then look very closely at anything that would have either a security, I hate to say bypass, but something where maybe you were supposed to be compliant in a certain way, or your company policy says X, Y, or Z should be the case, but maybe doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Identify those immediately. And then I think there's a conversation that would need to be had with the organization as a whole. Once users get accustomed to working from home, and once the business has shifted and empowered those users that they can do most of the things they need to, Let's say fast forward a month from now and things are starting to normalize and everybody's kind of going, quote, back to work where they would go back to an office. Users are still going to expect the ability to work from home. And so while it may not be, at the percentages we're seeing now where everybody's trying to work from home, there's a very good chance that this type of flexible and mobile workforce, we've seen the industry trending this way for a while, and I think that's one of the reasons we've seen a lot of our customers be somewhat ready for this, and capable of adjusting a few knobs here and there to get the job done. But I think that this might have been one of those things that kind of thrusted a lot of companies into that new, kind of cloud first, cloud friendly mobile workforce, bring your own device type of a working arrangement. So start with the change log for the first thing and make sure if there's anything that maybe didn't really comply to the way we would prefer things to do, that we've identified those. I think there's going to be a potential for isolated data that a user might have just been working on their laptop because it was easier than trying to connect to a file server. Those are things that if there's special or protected data that we need to make sure we bring back into the walls of the organization, that we do that. And then I do think there's a sit down and plan so that how can we support this now that it's not so much reactive, but how can we be proactive to allow for this type of a working arrangement with a little bit more control and forethought and design put into it.
Interesting feedback. Mike, what say you to that conversation? We talk about the dangerous and really sensitivity of even, potentially folks unlocking or opening different backdoors for security or new ways to get into an environment, right, that are untraditional. What do you say? I mean, obviously, you've always been a proponent of formal change control, as is Steve, as is the whole Catalyst crew. But are you in line with Steve, or do you have anything to add to the methods in which clients and organizations should be taking to keep up with these changes?
Yeah, I'm 100% in line with Steve on that. Definitely, spend the time now. If you're like me, 3 days from now, you may not remember the change you made 3 days ago. Do what you can to remember and document any change that was made, especially as it comes to security. We think, things like opening up or allowing extended periods of time with a VPN connection, being able to stay connected and things like that. Document those things, right? They might fall outside of your, security framework and your security protocols. But it's important to have that documented. And once things kind of settle down on that, revisit that list and start, really start documenting and testing and putting in place more control over that, so you can get things more secure now that the initial rush of work from home is over. And then take it a step further, right? Because this, what's happening now is kind of a great exercise from a business continuity perspective, right? We think about natural disasters and things like that happening, but a lot of cases it may be, hey, if a building floods or something like that, maybe all the users have to go home and work, right? So what's the protocol for that? Having that process now documented and formalized is a good way to be able to ensure in the future if something like this happens, or whatever happens again where a lot of users have to work from home, that there's a process in place for that, and you can follow that process and know that it works.
Great. Good feedback. Kyle, I'm sure you're back on audio, from a voice collaboration perspective. Obviously, there's been, a huge demand, lots of these accounts that have been spun up, maybe some outside the sanctioned corporate directory sort of thing. Is there anything that we need to be taking into account from a true video or collab side of things that we need to think about as users start coming home?
I think that's very important to have some plans there for sure, and I think also less on the technology side and more on the human side of things. How are we connecting with our employees as they're used to this, right? Let's document that as well. What's effective from a training standpoint? We've worked with several customers that are very quickly rolling out new collaboration tools, and they don't have that traditional hold over them from, hey, come into the office or this conference room and that sort of thing. So I think maybe figuring out what works and how best to engage with your people as in these sort of different settings that maybe they're not used to or you're not used to, and having a little less control over what you can do with them. And I think maybe also on the other side of that too, what's been effective for reaching your customers as well, or your clients, or whoever you're serving, right, as an organization, and making sure that has been secured. And again, something that maybe your organization has been resistant to in the past. Now you've been forced to move into this, and like Steve mentioned, maybe a can of worms has been opened here, but let's use that to our benefit as well, and see how we can better help people.
Sure, and I wonder too if there's going to be problems with, as Steve mentioned earlier, expectations of just being able to work from home all the time now. I think there's going to be many organizations that struggle with that psychological impact.
Yeah, and we were talking with a customer today who was talking about the stresses and challenges of that. It's hard to turn off work at that point, right? So again, more of that human side, but the work-life balance that maybe is easily defined in going into the office and coming home, but is less so when you're just working out of your kitchen or your office at home.
Sure. All right. Well, good. Well, those are some great ideas, guys, and I think very logical as far as tracking those sorts of scenarios. And again, we have helped many organizations go outside of their four walls, right? And we'll be there to help coming back in. But I do think every customer, every client, every company on the universe, so to speak, that's going through this should be doing those really three things, and those are documenting and understanding what changes have been made, setting that up, and then automating whatever they can so that they don't have too many hands. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen right now. We've seen that with multiple clients, so to speak, and I think the more organizations can keep that down through automation, the better off they'll be long term. One of the other questions I got that I didn't list in the beginning was really around what are some of the productivity hacks that you guys have been using to Kyle, to make sure that specifically you're not blurring too much into that work-life balance or having issues with those sorts of things. Do you guys have anything that you'd like to share with the audience before we open it up for true questions here that's made your day-to-day easier over these last few weeks? I mean, we're a pretty mobile team and we've been running as that for a long time, but what are some of the things that you guys are doing on a day-to-day basis to kind of keep the sanity?
I'll say for me, again, we work remote a lot, but one of the things that I first did when I started working more remote was making sure I have a dedicated office space for one. Kind of treat that as your office space, because at the end of the day, when you're tired and you're finished, you want to leave, right? Like you leave the office. And so that's one thing that I did. The other thing too is just, get up and walk outside, every hour, every 2 hours, just get up and walk around for about 15, 20 minutes, get some vitamin D. If the sun is shining, I find that helps a lot. And I've got a house full of kids and my wife is working from home as well. So on the productivity perspective, and as well as even, like bandwidth utilization and things like that, is, some of the tweaks we've done to be able to, to be able to work from home has been, if our kids are on, their tablets or whatever, watching a video or something, set the quality down low, it frees up more bandwidth, things like that. I don't get on video at this point, and my wife doesn't either, but those are just some of the things that we've done.
Yeah, I've got a couple there, Jesse. I think for me, having a morning routine that I was kind of going through regardless of where I was working from, and kind of sticking to that has been super helpful. I would obviously state that coffee is a significant part of that morning routine. But sticking to that routine helps it feel kind of a little bit more normal. I think something that Chris mentioned on our internal kind of Catalyst happy hour last week that I thought was really wise was focusing on the result, like what it is you're trying to accomplish, and not so much focusing on punching the time clock, sitting at your desk from 8 a.m. and then walking away from your desk at 5 p.m., but more so understanding what it is that you're trying to get accomplished for that day or the week, and then not knowing that you'll have a handful of tasks to get those things done, but as long as they get done, it doesn't necessarily matter if you did it from 8 till 9 or if you did it at 5:15 to 5:30, and focusing on that. And I think there might be a little bit of a management shift that we see that looks more like that where we're tracking tasks completed as opposed to, hours worked for the larger kind of corporation, corporate America after this. I think I've seen a lot of use of kind of like school rules. So there's a lot of like, if you're on video and you're having these conferences, I think video helps a lot if the bandwidth can be spared. And something as simple as gesturing or raising your hand or giving a thumbs up is a really easy way to be present and communicative in environments where, there are lawnmowers, barking dogs, kids, a little bit more chaos than most people are kind of accustomed to. And then I think right now there's also a lot of patience and tolerance for those things. So just being very open and saying like, hey, listen, the kids might come running in this room, but I am paying attention to you, or hey, listen, I apologize. I have a dog. I'm expecting, some food to be delivered or groceries to arrive. There's a chance that the doorbell's going to ring and the dog's going to bark. People are very, very patient with that right now. And I think being just letting people know ahead of time minimizes that distraction when it does occur. And then I think, like I said, the other things earlier, high quality audio, if you can do it, if you can get a headset that helps you focus on the task while you're focused on it, I think is another way to kind of help it feel, a little bit closer to 100%.
Good. Kyle, you got any hacks? I know that you've been going through the same exercise.
Yeah, definitely. I think, having communication tools that are, and this is kind of industry terms, but, I think it's easy to understand that asynchronous and that synchronous communication, right? So knowing when to expect responses right away and knowing when those responses can wait and kind of using those platforms effectively, I think really helps. And I think too, something that is easy to accomplish in an office, but less so when everybody's spread out, is scheduling little shorter touch points to manage through a task as opposed to trying to manage it all over text or through email or those sorts of things. And I found that to be very helpful when you can't just walk over and talk to somebody at their desk.
Good to know. Well, guys, those are great. We got a couple of questions coming in, and again, anybody in the audience that wants to physically go live, you can certainly raise your hand, and we'll be happy to unmute and let you chat live with the panel. We do have a question from the audience. Okay, so let me just take a second to read this and frame this up. Okay, we're seeing some challenges today in our business with maintaining expected levels of profitability. What can I do on the technology front to lower my expenses in this area? So this area, guys, I think we could talk about this with cloud optimization. We could talk about this in, an SD-WAN perspective or hosted voice. There's many areas, and we'll try to answer those three things. And I'll turn that over to you, Mike. Interesting, to hear your story around what organizations are doing to kind of curtail some of those costs or make some savings in the traditional kind of infrastructure data center space.
Yeah, a lot of that really is keeping a better track of resource utilization. So, in the data center space, if additional, resources are needed to support, more workers from home, things of that nature, and a lot of times those physical resources are tight. So really just keeping a really good track of, utilization across the board, and managing resources that way.
Gotcha. So one of the things we know in our cloud practice, right, is those bills keep coming in every month, right? Whether or not those things are actually being used, especially if you have, reserved instances and whatnot. Steve, what can clients do on the cloud specific side to help maybe optimize their costs and their kind of financial obligations there to make sure that they're only paying for really what they need as opposed to what has been provisioned?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things there. There are some great tools that we've used to help customers manage that. It's a very, very common issue for those that are kind of already operational in the cloud. We found great success. I think Cloud Checker is one that we've found to be super valuable for our customers, and I think those tools tend to be very popular with management because management loves to be able to save money, and those are things that you can actively track that look at the resources used, what are what's actually being used versus what's been provisioned. and then you can kind of shrink that delta such that you're only paying for truly what you need. For organizations that maybe weren't really kind of cloud native or cloud operational before this started, there's a mind shift that needs to happen where you're probably not going to buy a 1 or 3 year reserved instance. You kind of did what they used to call cloud bursting, right? Where you're spraying extra resources into the cloud to leverage the resources as you need them. Well, those are unlike your data center workloads where they're running on servers that are paid for, which means if you don't need them overnight, shut them off overnight. And that's a very easy way to kind of ramp down that bill. But that automated kind of scaling up and scaling down that we talked about earlier is a great way to reduce costs, especially, like I said, in the scale down. If you're not used to that, it can be a little bit weird to think about. But if you're operating in maybe 2 US time zones, you can be pretty accurate with when the users will need resources as opposed to when they won't. If your organization kind of follows the sun and you don't have that luxury, you can still scale down to accommodate users in other areas of the world. But once you move to cloud, you have to think differently. It's a little bit more of a utility pricing for organizations that haven't been there before than a data center today.
And to add to that, there's definitely some native tools within most of the major cloud platforms out there to automate a lot of that as well. So rather than basing it on time, they can track actual resource utilization and know when, based on criteria that you set, when to spin up an additional resource, and then when to spin it back down.
Sure. Interesting. Well, guys, those are great. And Kyle, I'll flip the last component over to you. So lots of organizations are taking advantage of some of this free collaboration tools. Some of them are being forced to pay for them and potentially getting locked into the contracts. What are some of the tips or hacks that organizations can do to make sure that this spend doesn't get out of control when they do bring people back into the office?
Yeah, that's a great point, right? I think it's easy enough to slap a Band-Aid on there or to put the Flex Seal on there, but what's going to be that long-term plan? And I think definitely call for a strategy on that and see what's working and what's not, and if people are using it effectively, is there value there? I think that there are a lot of tools, a lot of cloud-based tools. And I know it's hard to talk about cloud, especially in the voice world, and talk about reducing spend, but I do think it can help bring some predictability to that spend that maybe you can't have with an on-prem just because of the nature of how that works when you're supporting all that. But I think especially for a smaller organization, there's some great ways to wrap some of those things together and kind of bundle them together and try to get those tools working together. And maybe you can do a lot of your communication through one medium that also links into another for some things, and try to kind of balance those and provide maybe multiple tools, but I think also try to get people to use the whole portfolio rather than just maybe one section of it. And that, I think, can help a little bit. But again, once that box is open, it is definitely harder to close, and definitely a good thing to strategize about best ways to purchase those and procure those going forward. Great.
Well, gentlemen, on the panel, again, I'm walking away much more educated in, again, how I would be dealing with things, or really how we can add more value to other clients that we interact with and communicate with here in the future. It doesn't look like we have any more questions that we're going to be able to get to today on this episode, but we do thank everybody for joining. We hope that this was not only valuable to you, but that you walked away learning something and making your organization better because of it. So I hope everyone has a good weekend. I hope that you guys, like us here at Catalyst, appreciate a little bit of respite, and we look forward to chatting here next week. And please stay tuned to our blog posts as well as our social networks for our next episode. Guys, thanks again to Mike, Steve, and Kyle. I appreciate what you do for me, not only on the team, but also for our clients. And I hope you guys have a good weekend. Thanks for joining.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Have a good weekend, everybody.